Welcome into a brand new edition of the 06010 ESPN Communications podcast. I'm the host, Alex Feuz, and we are joined by Malika Andrews, host of NBA Today and NBA Countdown. Malika, thanks so much for joining the podcast today. First question for you. When did you know you were going to make it in this industry?
Make it. Oh my goodness. I'm still figuring out navigating that feeling. No, I'm sort of serious. I see you laughing, but I think that one of the things about this industry is I'm not going to say that it is hard because it's such a privilege, right? And I've said this, the Monty Williams saying, we have get to jobs, not have to jobs. So I won't say it's hard, but I will say it can be trying and it's competitive. And I think that it requires sort of constant innovation. And because of that, I think sitting around, I spend a lot of time at Lakers games. I'm based in Los Angeles. And as folks come through LA, LeBron inevitably gets questions from visiting reporters and folks saying, have you taken the time to sit down and look around and think about X and look down and think about Y, whatever he's accomplished over his 40 years, his 22 in the NBA? And his answers usually are no, because he's always looking to the next thing, because he still thinks of himself as a competitor who's trying to do what he does at the absolute highest level. And I think I'm not comparing myself to LeBron James. However, I am saying that mentality is something that resonates, because this is an industry of constantly pushing yourself to be better. It's an industry that changes very quickly. And just when you have a handle on one thing, that's when something else is required of you. It's what makes it fun. But I think it's also what makes it so that you're always looking around and saying, okay, I'm here. How do I push our product forward to be there? And so I don't think this is a very long-winded way of saying, I don't think I've looked around and said, wow, I've made it. However, a couple of years ago, when I started on NBA Today, our studio is so beautiful and so incredible here in Los Angeles. And at the time, the only show that came out of it sort of routinely was NBA Today. Now, every once in a while, SportsCenter will use our studio or other things, and we love sharing our space. But I remember walking in, I'd forgotten something in the studio, and it was late at night, and all of the lights were out. And somehow it feels even bigger when it's dark like that.
Mm.
And looking around at all the lights on the ceiling and all of these amazing screens and this planning of a studio that so many people had put in that work before I was a part of the television product here. And I looked around and I remember thinking, holy snap, this entire studio is for what we do, for what I do on this show. And that was a very cool, this entire space and operation is for what Janae, Richard, Kendrick, and I do. And that was a very cool, very small pinch me moment when it was quiet enough that I let my brain go there.
I want to go back to your previous point about having the mindset of basically never settling and always pushing yourself to get better. When did you know you had to have that sort of mindset in this business?
I think it's not so much a knowing of when I had to have the mindset. It's more, I think that creativity and curiosity is required in this job. And so I think as a naturally curious person, I was always the kid who annoyed my mother with why? Why is it that way? Well, why can't I do that? Why is that the answer to this? Why? And I think that curiosity um, translates into always seeking another story, seeking the story behind the story, that this is because. And I think that when that's how your brain is wired, that's how you end up moving through the world. So it wasn't like one day I sat down and said, oh, okay, I understand that this is necessarily what's required. It's more that curiosity is naturally the position that I come from. And also when I look around at all the folks who I admire most in the industry, it's a common trait that they have. So I associate that with the excellence required to be great and to cover greatness, because really that's what we do, right? As much as we want to believe that this is about us and how we put our own special spins and flares on the athletes we cover, it's really your preparedness, I think, matching the preparedness of what athletes put into the game, right? And so that's what I'm trying to challenge. And I think what all of us are trying to challenge ourselves to do.
You've mentioned, obviously, you're the host of NBA Today and NBA Countdown. What are the differences between hosting those two shows?
That's a great question, and not sure a question that I've necessarily been asked before. But I think that NBA Countdown, the star is the game, and you're talking to people who are tuning in to watch these teams and these players. And so, really, I think it's the audience that's different. At 3 o'clock Eastern in the afternoon, the day after games have happened and several hours before games are tipping off, that's the sickos, as JJ Redick might say, right? That's the diehard NBA fans that we know in that hour we're talking to the dedicated fan who knows the box scores and is like, what else you got? Because my appetite for the NBA is insatiable. It's also the time that players are in the training room, right? So I hear from players much more in the NBA Today timeframe. I'm talking to the diehard fans, and that includes players. Players are diehard NBA fans because that's when they're getting off of their practice and they're on the training table, or it's hours before the game, and the really early arrival players, it's on and on the. That's where I'm hearing from them. In the half hour before the game, it's the fan bases of the teams, absolutely, and then in a wider brushstroke, the fans of the sport. And that's also when I'm hearing from executives, right? They have it on in their office before tip off. Players aren't watching at that time because they're getting ready to play the games usually. And so I think that it's two different audiences that you're speaking to, and doing one helps me to prepare for the other.
In your hosting roles, you've covered a lot of historic events and moments in the NBA. What's one that's had a lasting impact on you so far?
The Milwaukee Bucks doing the trophy ceremony in 2021 was a career highlight for me, really. I started my career with ESPN as a beat reporter based in the Midwest, and I loved covering the Bucks. At the time, Giannis was still very much, it was the year he won his first MVP, and so there wasn't the same attention that's on them now. And so I got to really know that team with their guards down. And so standing in the middle of a sea of people, and by the way, I think when you broadcast, certainly I love my favorite shows, and I hope that we can do more of them in the future, because I really think it gets to the essence of the sport, is when we're on the road and when we're at games. But when you're sitting in studio, you're not thinking about the hundreds of thousands, millions of people that you're talking to. But when you're standing in the middle of an arena where there was security that didn't go the way that it was planned, and so fans had actually poured onto the court for that particular ceremony, you actually see the people that you are talking to. You see and feel the energy of the fans and of the players, and to see guys on the mountaintop, something that they've looked forward to and hoped for years and years and years, and put all this work toward, and to see that culminate and pay off. And I can honestly say I was as happy for Giannis and to be near that greatness in that moment as I was for the ball boys that I'd known for years and the security guards that had been watching it. It just, there's nothing like it. I've never felt an energy like that before. And at its core, I think sports is a unifying force. And I felt that in that moment, unlike anything I've ever seen. It's always cool to be in the building when a team wins a championship, and not something I take for granted, but to be the person to say, and now introducing your champion, and to feel that roar that kind of comes from the crowd and the raw emotions and the interview, like people are just feeling in that moment. They're not thinking or positioning, or they're just feeling. And it was the coolest thing I've ever gotten to do.
What was it like being a beat writer of one team and then transitioning to this role to covering the entire league?
Yeah, I think that being a beat reporter prepared me for everything that I do now, because I still try to, and
Mhm.
it's not the same. But I try to see all 30 teams when they come through LA at some point. I think being around is an incredibly important thing. I think that showing up and being able to face the players that you're talking about, I think that that means a lot to people. And I think that in an age of screens and everyone is accessible to everyone through a tweet or through a threads post or through an Instagram, I think that being able to actually talk to folks face to face is a really important art and a really important piece of everything that we do. And so being a beat reporter, first of all, I think folks, I get teased a lot whenever I see the Bucks. Giannis will always tease me. I remember when you used to come to practices in your sweatpants and
Uh,
with your cap pulled over your eyes, and now you're all television and yada yada. And I said, well, I could say the same about you. I remember when before, but I do think that builds credibility with people. And telling stories is what this is all about. And I don't think anybody knows the stories as well as the people who are around these guys every single day. And that's often the beat writers, which is why I religiously read when I was doing sidelines. I religiously read what all of the beat reporters are doing. When I know that we're going to be deep diving into a team or a segment, I look at the beat writers on that team because they know those folks better than anyone does. And so I think that that's why it's so important to sort of feed that. And I still think of myself as like whenever a young person going to the National Association of Black Journalists, or whenever someone asks me about where or how I started on television, I always make sure to go back and say, well, it wasn't on television, because it's been a really important piece of the puzzle for me.
and I do want to ask about that. Your relationship with the NABJ, what is that like for you?
Being a part of NABJ has been it's kind of wild because sometimes I look around and I say, like, me? I'm the person that you are asking for advice for. I feel like I'm still asking for advice from the elder statesmen, the legends of our industry. But, Mark Spears, our colleague at ESPN, but someone who I've known since I was 18, um, he was really instrumental in my career. And reading my clips, I would send him my University of Portland newspaper clips that I wrote and ask for feedback on them. And to have that come full circle, where there are folks who somehow, some way think that I can be that person for them, is really special to me, because I think that that's how, as an industry, we've moved forward. The National Association of Black Journalists Sports Task Force, right, which is all the sports journalists who were involved or are involved in NABJ, all the Black sports writers and the Black sports reporters and folks on television. The Sports Task Force started when a baseball writer whose name was Larry Whiteside had a piece of paper. And every time he would go into a press box and see a new reporter who was Black, he would write that person's name on a piece of paper. That's how few folks there were. And so to be able to be a part of seeing the Sports Task Force grow to where we literally fill up ballrooms for mentorship breakfasts, and that's how many folks want to carry the torch of this industry and this storytelling. And it's so important because the majority of athletes, particularly in basketball, are people of color. I think that it's really special to be seen as someone. I feel a duty to be able to give back in a way that was given to me.
Yeah, it's really incredible work being done there. Before we get to the Fast Five, I do want to ask about your experience covering the NBA during the bubble back in
Oh,
2020. What was that experience like for you in that unique time?
it was such a whirlwind. I think it's something I reflect on as being the catalyst to launch my television career. But at the time, it really felt like a responsibility because the whole world had stopped and everyone was sort of watching what was happening in Orlando. And, I think a lot of times sports can be relegated. I came from newspapers where sports at times was relegated to sort of the candy store of the paper. And, the big stuff was maybe it was politics or maybe it was local coverage. And at that point, it felt like sports was really the center of a conversation around health, certainly with the coronavirus, around racial reckonings with the Milwaukee Bucks and protesting what had happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin. There was so much happening there that it really felt like sports was at the center of what everyone was focused on in the world. And it felt like a real responsibility to chronicle that. So it's kind of an interesting thing to look back on now. I think the next season picked up so quickly that it's almost like we didn't even have time to pause and think about what a enormous effort it was that Adam Silver and Bob Iger were able to put together in the Disney bubble down there. But it was also, you look back and it's like, oh my goodness, I was wearing gloves and I was wearing face shields and there was also a little bit of bonding, I think, that happened there, because certainly for the players and coaches and all of us who were in the bubble, there's always, whenever it comes up, it's sort of, we make eye contact and it's like, yes, you remember, you were one of the folks who went through and soldiered through all of that happened there. So it's it's interesting. I learned a lot because there was only a handful of Disney or only a handful of ESPN employees down there. And so it was the first time I ever did NBA sidelines. It was the first time that I did a lot of the television reporting that I did. And it also, one of the things that I took from the bubble that was most special to me was my relationship with our producer, Melinda Adams, who was there with me. We just became two peas in a pod. She is so fantastic. And there's no one else for 107 days that I think I could have had that type of working relationship with. It was really something.
Now, Malika, this was my favorite part of any interview I do. It's the Fuse 5. It's the Fuse box, Fast 5, quick round. Okay. Are you ready?
Yes.
If you could host a podcast with anyone in your phone contacts, who would you choose and why?
If I could host a podcast with anyone in my phone contacts, it would be Ava DuVernay, because I just think she is a brilliant, brilliant mind and director.
The Emirates NBA Cup is back this week. What are you looking forward to most this go around? Is there any courts that you are looking out for?
Oklahoma City's court was hard to miss last year. I wonder if it will be, it's always hard to tell the renderings if it's going to be, it's so blue. It's so strong on TV. And I'm looking forward to going to Vegas. I'm looking forward to seeing who those final four teams will be standing, and if the Lakers can figure something out to defend their title, or if, as I predicted last year, it'll be a young team. Or maybe the Cavs. The Cavs, that could be interesting. That's like 4 predictions in one.
Most fun story you've covered since joining ESPN, besides the championship that you've already mentioned?
I wrote a story about George Hill, who was on the Bucks at the time, who decided to turn a multi-acre property in Texas into a animal wildlife. He imported, I mean, I'm talking like zebras and just the hobbies that some of these guys have. That was a fun one.
Who's one person at ESPN that has really become one of your mentors and you would credit a lot of your career to them?
That's a good question. There's a lot, but Dave Roberts has really been a mentor to me, who, to the point of, I remember early on when I would bob my head a lot on TV for no reason, because I thought that you needed to do this the entire TV hit. And one time, like, he took the time as an executive to say, hey, is there a reason you do that? And I said, just because I thought I was supposed to. He said, no, be you. And that sort of opened me up into a ability to kind of be myself. And he's been a really incredible mentor to me.
And the last one for the Fast 5, what's one skill that's been essential to you in your career?
Writing has been essential to me in my career. Still, anyone who wants to go into television, I write every day. It's not the same as the same type of writing, but writing I think will serve you well anywhere you go. That was like
Malika,
not fast. That was medium-ish. I'm not a fast. I'm a distance runner, not a sprinter.
it was perfect. Malika, thanks so much for taking the time on today's 06010 ESPN Communications podcast. This was so much fun. Thanks for doing it.
Alex, thank you so much for your time and for having me.